Greetings, pilgrims. Welcome to another episode of the Polygon Pilgrimage, and today I've got something pretty cool for you. I've always been a fan, as maybe many of you are, of the TitanFall series. I think it's a really cool pair of games, especially TitanFall 2, and I was very excited to have a friend of mine challenge me and say, hey, could you show me how to create that kind of cockpit inside the mech effect inside of Unreal? So that's what we're doing this week. Now I've changed up some of my normal settings, and as a preamble, yes, I'm going to show you how to do all of this, and as long as you have Unreal installed and you have access to my website to download the assets, you will be able to follow along. I will provide everything to you. Okay, so don't worry about it if you don't have Photoshop or Substance Painter or some of the things that we use in this episode. So as I mentioned, I changed up some of my normal settings, and my play button up here actually is launching in a new window, so I want to make sure that that works for you. And the reason for that is because we're dealing with aspect ratios with the screen. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So let's look at the effect. So here is our effect. Here's our world here, our little scene here. I've got just a couple of assets from a pack that I downloaded and some that come with Unreal, and just kind of put together a little sci-fi corridor here. And as you can see on the screen, there are these lines that denote the 5 regions of my inside of the mech. And as you can see, the top right region there, the emitters are turned on, those white lights, but the screen is not showing up for some reason. So that's the effect we're going for, is the ability to turn on and off different panels or sections of our screen to simulate this. I'm in a mech trudging around, and then maybe you get hit with some damage, and that part of the screen gets messed up, and now it's harder to see. So that's kind of what we're going for, okay? So let's step through it and talk about how it works, and then we'll step through each setting. So the core of how this works is that we are taking the feedback from our camera, we're converting that into a texture, we're applying that over top of our HUD, and then we are masking it out, and we're combining it with this feedback from this camera, which is looking at our interior. So this would be like if the mech closed around you, and you're safe inside, but now none of the screens are actually showing up, but all the emitters are shining. And this was painted in Substance Painter just pretty quickly. Not really going to go over that at all, but I will provide the textures. So if you wanted to have this exact model and these textures, and you wanted to follow along, we'll go through all of that for you. Okay, so back to our little room here, and this room is just kind of put together. There's nothing special about it. It's just for demonstration purposes. So the first thing we need to do is fire up our first-person character, which is this here. So let's go ahead and open that. So this is what it looks like. And a lot of this is exactly the same as your typical first-person character. I've done some things like I've disabled the gun. You know, I made sure it's not visible, so that's not a big deal. This is from a previous tutorial where we did our inspection. You'll notice I'm reusing some of the assets from my previous tutorials just to kind of get a jumping off point to show you where we're at, but I will explain how to create it from scratch. So this is the default first-person player, and all I've done here is added this scene capture component 2D. Now to do that, all you have to do is select your camera and say add component, and right here if you just type 2D, it will automatically filter down to the one because it's the only one with 2D in the name as of the recording of this video. In the future they might add more, who knows. So we're going to add that scene capture component, okay? Now if I select that and I go along the right hand bar here, you'll notice that it says texture target, and it's wanting a texture file, because what it's telling me is, okay, I'm going to take what the camera is looking at, and with this component I'm going to record it onto this texture. Okay, that's pretty cool. So in our assets here, let's go to our content in my TF2 folder. I called it TF2 because it's similar to TitanFall 2, and we have a couple of textures here. So this one that is looking through the camera at our world, I called it world capture, okay? And this is a render target. So you can just right click here, and I believe it's under textures, media, textures, render target, right there. Okay, so you make a new one of those, and then you give it a name, and I called it world capture because we're capturing the world, all right? And then you can go into your camera, and you can drag and drop it from here. So I could drag from here, and go in here and say you're using this. See, it would accept that there. It's already there, so we don't have to worry about it. But world capture right in there, and then you'll see that appear here in the little preview. So now we have our world being captured onto a texture kind of in real time, every frame. This is quite expensive as far as computationally, but this is just to get the effect, to prove the effect. There's obviously better ways to do this or other ways to do this, but this is the way I came up with, so I wanted to share it with you. So we have that there. Excellent. Now that that's done, that's all we have to do with the first person character. So we're done with them. So the next thing we need to do is come up with a couple of materials. And so our first material, this is going to be our cockpit background. So what this is just this screen over here that you see. So I've done the same kind of thing. I put a camera in the world. I named him BG Cam, so he's the background camera. And then he also has a capture 2D component. Let's see, he's down here. There you go. Scene capture component 2D. There he is. So I need to make another one. So this one was called world capture. So I made this one called BG capture. Same thing, right click, render target, and then I drag and dropped it over here. Okay? Perfect. So then I'm going to make a material. So I'm going to right click and say material, and I'm going to name it BG. I'm sorry. So you can do too many background stuff. Right click and say matte underscore cockpit background. And that's what this guy is here. And now I'm going to select him and change his type to user interface and opaque. And then I'm going to drag and drop in my background capture, my BG capture. Just drag and drop him and say, put your full color into the final color. And that's all he is. Okay, we're just capturing a live feed of this, which is static. So yes, this could be a texture and you wouldn't have to use a screen capture. So that would be a little less computationally expensive. I wanted to eventually have some effects and maybe have the lights blinking or softly glowing, a little bit more life to them. So this will allow that in the future. Okay, so now with that all set up, and this material is just very simple. We just drag and drop, and there you go, you're done. So now we need one more texture, and this one's a lot more complex, but don't worry, it's not hard, it's just a lot of an easy thing. So we're gonna make another one called matte underscore cockpit screens, and that's this one here. So let's take a look at that guy. So yes, he looks a lot more busy, but I tried to make it organized for you. So in short, what we're doing is we are breaking apart our screen into the 5 parts. And then what we're doing is we are combining those parts as a mask for the world capture. So this is our world capture. See, world capture. And we're just going to mask off parts of it based upon what we want to turn on or off on these screens. So right now I have the top right component is turned off. So you can see that it is masking that out. So when we go to the game, you notice that that top corner was showing through to our background because our foreground, which is the world, is not there. And the way this works is really simple, but before we continue, let's jump over to Photoshop, and I'm going to show you how I made these things, okay? Jump into Photoshop, and here are my textures. They're really nothing fancy, but each of these is an individual image that is a PNG with transparency, and it's only the white area for each section that I want. And I named these all TF2 because that's the name of my internal naming schema for the effect. And then TR, top right mask. And then this is TL, top left mask. This one is the actual lines in between them. And I kept this because I use this as an overlay on top to kind of show that they do have a seam when they come together. Now in the official games, there's a little bit of a seam. It's a much nicer looking seam than mine. And that seam does eventually fade away so that you're not obstructed with the game view. Makes perfect sense. It's a beautiful decision. But for me, I wanted to keep it on the screen because I thought it was really cool. It reminds you that, yeah, you're inside a mechanical thing and it has, you know, physical seams. So I kept that, but same kind of thing. So this is just black with transparency because it's just an overlay. So I call this TF2 underscore frame. So that's the kind of frame that it goes in. And here's the center. And here's the bottoms. Now the way I made these is actually pretty simple. I just went over here to the shapes and I believe I chose Polygon and nope, not that one. I went to this guy. Yeah. And I chose one of these and I think it was this guy here. And I just dragged out a shape and said, okay, I like the shape of this. And so I put this in the center as that center one and then I cut off the top. And then by using this, I was able to subtract from rectangles. So I'm not going to go over all of that because, again, this is not the point of this tutorial, but I wanted to show you kind of how I did this and explain that I used just some simple tools and a little bit of masking, you know, something like this. So if we make a new layer, Sure, make it, nope. That's new image. Make a new layer. And if you combine these, then now they're flat, and now I could erase as much as I want from the top. And see, that's kind of how I got that center. So that's how we do that. So select, deselect. So this would be like the center one, and then you can cut out. So that's how I did this. I will provide you the textures, but I just wanted you to see that each one of these is its own layer that we imported, okay? So we're done with Photoshop. We've imported all those textures. You can see them here. They look pure white, but if you look at them carefully, you can see them. So there's the frame, the center, top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. Okay, back to our material here. So each of these is identical, so I'm just going to go over the one and explain how all this works. But when we zoom in here, we have a scalar parameter. And what this is you can create this by right-click, scalar parameter, under parameters, just like that. You can give it any name you want. So let's call this tutorial parameter, okay? And the scalar parameter by default is a float value, and you can give it a default value, which is what value does it start at when you start the game, a minimum and a maximum, so it will not go over those values or under those values depending. So what I've done here is I've named these the name of the section of the screen and then the words on/off, so that I know that which one it is that I'm turning this on or off. And what I've done is I've given these a default value of 1, means that it's on. So you see bottom right is on, we can see it. Default value of 1, minimum of 0. Then what we're going to do is do a little bit of math. This looks complicated, it's really not. Think about it this way. So we're going to compare between A and B. So A is always going to be the value we're bringing in. So what is the value? Right now it's 1. B is always going to be 1. So because we're comparing A to B, if A is greater than B, which it can't possibly be, but if it did end up being, 1.1 or something like that, then what do we want? We want a value of 1. Okay? That's just what that means. If A is equal to B, so if it's 1 and it's on, perfect, then it's equal to 1. If A, the value we bring in, is anything less than 1, down to a bottom maximum value of 0, then we're going to make it 0. So if it falls to 0.99, 0. So it's either you pass the test with 100% or you don't. Okay? And what that's going to do here is out of this, we're going to get a value of either 1 or 0, on or off. So when we multiply that value by our texture, which is a mask, and we're taking from the alpha of this, from the mask position from this, then you're going to get either on or off essentially for this quadrant. So for example, here's the bottom right. Let's set this to 0. So it falls below the value of 1, right? And I'll hit save. And let's wait just a moment here. And you'll see that now the bottom right has turned off because he's below that value. And now he does not, what's getting passed from here now is 0. So 0 times this means don't show it. Okay, that's pretty cool. So let's turn this guy back on. Set that to 1 again. There we go. So he's back. There we go. So for each of these, what I've done is the same setup all 5 times because there's a center and 4 corners. And then here we add the 2 together, add the 2 together, add these 2, add these 2. So essentially what we're getting at the end of the mask is the combination of all of these. So if one of them is 0, it doesn't show, and you get this mixed bag, okay? So for example, let's just show that we're working correctly here. Here's the center. We're going to turn the center off as well. So hit save. So now we're getting a 1 positive value for all of these except for the 0s, which are the top and center. So now if I just go back here and hit play, we should see, yep, our center, we're looking at the center of our mech and the top right. So those screens have been damaged and they're not showing up anymore. So now as we roam around, it's much harder to see if your center screen gets damaged. So isn't that pretty cool? So, okay, perfect. So let's go back. And obviously we want to see everything, so let's turn that back on to 1. Save. And we'll also turn on the bottom, the top right rather, just because we've got everything going. So this guy was set to 0 for testing purposes, so we'll set him to 1. So now we should see the whole screen. Awesome. Okay, so we're almost there. So, a couple more things we need to do. We need to create the actual HUD, and we need to create the blueprint that is going to be the widget. So the difference is the HUD is like a container, for all of the information for everything that's going to be put onto the screen. But the blueprint is the actual stuff that gets displayed on the screen, okay? So if I go to my HUD, you'll see here, to create a HUD, very simple. You right-click, blueprint, and you type the word HUD, and you say you want a HUD, okay? Now to get this to show up in your world here, you're going to have to set your world settings. So you're going to need a custom game mode, and then under your HUD class, make sure you set it to the HUD that you create. So create your HUD, right-click HUD, and it'll look like this. It'll be nothing at first. That's fine. Then go here to your world settings. Okay, world settings. You're going to need a custom game mode. You can choose one of the drop-down ones, and then as soon as these become changeable, you're all set. And then here, HUD class, change this to the HUD that you created. I called mine TF2 HUD because, you know, we're working off that kind of an effect. You can also get to that by going into your, I believe under your project settings. Let's take a look here together. And I think it's maps and modes. Yeah, and it's right here as well. So 2 places to find the same information, okay? So you change that so that way the game will say, okay, I know that you're playing the game, and what do you want me to use for the HUD? And I can say, I want you to reach in and use this HUD that I'm creating now. All right, so this is what it will look like. Nothing really fancy. Nothing in the construction script. In the event graph, it's very simple. Off of event begin play, we're going to create an instantiation of our widget. So hold on, we'll come back to that in a second. It does need the owning player to be the player controller. So you just right click and say get player controller. There you go. Hook that up. And then off of here, just drag off of this guy and say add to viewport. I'm going to connect those two together. Okay, so just like this. Add to viewport. There you go. Okay. So let's let me reconnect that. There we go. All set. Okay, so that will put it. What this is saying is the HUD, which remember is our container, says right when the game begins, what do you want me to do? You want me to get a copy of the widget, and you want me to put it on the screen. Perfect. So now we need to make the widget. So the widget here is actually pretty cool. To create that, we're going to right click, user interface, widget blueprint. You've seen me do this in a couple other tutorials, but just in case this is your first time, welcome. So user interface, widget blueprint. And when we bring that up, it's going to look blank. It's going to look like nothing at all, like this. Okay. Well, maybe the panel will be there. So we're going to add a couple of things. So let's do them in order. So the first one is going to be an image. So you just click up here, image, click and drag and drop. And these are my settings because I had to move it a little bit and scale it up and down a little bit to get it to fit because I'm capturing a square image at a 1920 by 1080 ratio. So it's a little weird, but this is what I ended up with is 0, -384, 1920, 1848. And what we're going to put in here for the image is not actually an image technically. We're putting our material because the material is this guy, which is a live view of the world. So we can have this kind of be dynamic by putting in a material instead. So here in the thing, you can just go to here and click and drag from your content browser to put this in here. So this is a material, and it might say something about, do you want me to update the material because it notices that it's not quite the right type? If you get that, what that means is that you did not tell this to be a user interface. So just make sure you do that, okay? So we'll drag that into there, and that's all you have to do for this. He's all set. He's just kind of a static background image. Perfect. Next one is center. So this is going to be exactly the same thing, a little different because we're going to drag and drop another image, and you have to put them in this order. I'll talk about that in a second. But this guy is just 00, 1920 by 1080, and then this material is the cockpit screens. So this is this complex guy, okay? So now you can see here, we're going to reach in with code and hit these boxes to be able to change which parts of the screen are on or off. And that's going to get updated on this, which gets put over top of the screen. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so that's going to put us here. We put Mech Cockpit screens right here, 1920 by 1080. We're all good. There's nothing else you have to do to that. Then go to our frame. Our frame, as you can see here, these black lines appear. He's just decorative. He's just, you know, like I said, I like the fact that it kind of continues to show the breakup of the screens. So again, he's a 1920 by 1080. He is just an individual image. So you can drag and drop him right on top of here and set it, draw as image. So a couple of things real quick. First, we're going to talk about the Z order. So the Z order is the order in which it draws things. So if you think about, you have a stack of papers, what paper is on the bottom or what paper is on the top of the stack? Well, the top of the stack is the one you're going to see first, right? So layers like this inside of a HUD work in the same way. You need to make sure that the thing that you're going to see on top of everything else has the highest Z order. So for example, if I go to my frame, that's the very top layer. I change that Z order to 2. I go to my center, which is my actual screens, which is what you should see the world. So I set that to 1. And then the cockpit background, I set that to 0. Okay, so that way they're stacked properly. So it's lowest to highest. So 0, 1, 2. So the highest 2 is the frames on top of everything, and everything stacks nicely. Now, the other thing you have to do is down here, under behavior, under visibility, set this to self-hit test invisible. What that means is that each of these will show up, but they're not going to block a click. This is the problem I had where when we did for battle boards, when we did the health here, and we had the custom health, I wasn't able to click through that because it was blocking everything. But if you set it to self-hit test invisible, that means that it's not going to check for hits and I can click past it. So it's good for things that you don't need to click to interact with, okay? Which is fine for all of our purposes here. So with all of that set and everything set, and then we come back here to the HUD, again, now you can see we can actually create this. So you drag off of here, create, we're going to say create widget. And it's going to be like this, and we're going to do a drop down here, and we're going to pick our widget. So mine is called Inspection HUD because I'm working off of a previous project just to make sure that I had something to work with instead of starting completely from scratch. But you select your HUD here from the drop down, and that way, or your widget, the name of your widget. So you select that from here and from your drop down, and then it'll say create a copy of this widget and now put it on the screen. So now with everything complete, let's go ahead and take a look at our world. So here we have a camera is providing, our camera is actually providing our view of the world. And in this state, you could just have just this frame over top of the camera. It does do this really kind of neat, kind of wobbly effect. I think it's kind of cool. It almost resembles the fact that a camera is mounted on the front of this thing, so it's not quite totally accurate. You know, it's a little bit off, which is kind of cool. Then we can go in and we can say, okay, let's simulate some damage to our screens, right? So let's simulate damage. I'm going to say bottom left, he got knocked out. And let's knock out the top right as well. Okay. So we'll save that. So just kind of reach in and say, hey, here's how we would in theory do this. There you go. So, and let's go back to the game here, and boom. Now we're seeing through to that underlying texture. Remember, he's on Z order 0, so he's the lowest level. So when things start getting knocked out and we start removing from that layer ordering, now what we're seeing is just what's on top. And that's really cool. So now we have the interior of our cockpit. We start to see more and more of it. So looks like we have to go get some repairs because we're getting damaged here. All right. So I hope hope you guys have enjoyed. That's all I have for this week. I really hope that this was fun for you guys, and that it answered obviously my friend's question, and that you guys got some cool stuff from this. And I will be providing all of these assets. So what we have here is there's this model, which is nothing fancy, just kind of threw it together. The textures for this model. I will provide the, let's see, the textures for this model, and then the textures for doing the mask and the frame, okay? The rest of this is just materials that were made from inside of Unreal. I mean, I just used from the standard assets, so there's nothing really for that, and then they're all just cubes. And then these are part of a pack that I purchased, so I can't give them to you, but everything else you can create any kind of environment you want, and then everything else is just built right inside of Unreal. So just kind of go through them again. All of these things we built together, and there you go. So I hope you guys have enjoyed very much. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, if it doesn't work or you have some trouble, let me know. We'll work through it together. And that's all for this week, guys. As always, keep practicing, get better, and I'll see you next time as the pilgrimage continues.